અવાજ નથી આવતો. એની રસી છે.
Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of Chairman and members of Justice P.D. Desai Memorial Lecture Committee and Trustee of Pralin Public Charitable Trust for 20th Justice P.D. Desai Memorial Lecture to be delivered by Shri Lord Bhikhu Parekh on the topic Multiculturalism in the Age of Globalization. As per our tradition, we proceed our function with a prayer by Shri Amar Bhatt, Advocate and Member Trustee of Pralin Charitable Trust. Shri Amar Bhai will render verse on Guru Vandana, followed by Kabir's Pad on Guru Mahima.
अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. साधो सो सतगुरु मोहि भावे. साधो सो सतगुरु मोहि भावे. सतनाम का भर भर प्याला, सतनाम का भर भर प्याला, आप पीबे मोहि प्यावे. साधो सो सतगुरु मोहि भावे. मेले जायना महंत कहावे. मेले जायना महंत कहावे. पूजा भेंट न लावे. पर्दा दूर करे आँखिन का, निज दर्शन दिखलावे. साधो सो सतगुरु मोहि भावे. जाके दर्शन साहिब दरसे, जाके दर्शन साहिब दरसे. अनहद शब्द सुनावे. माया के सुख दुख कर जाने, संग न सुपन चलावे. साधो सो सतगुरु मोहि भावे. निस दिन सत्संगत में राजे, निस दिन सत्संगत में राजे. शब्द में सुरत समावे. कहे कबीर ताको भय नाही, निर्भय पद परसावे। साधो सो सतगुरु मोहि भावे। जो सतनाम का भर भर प्याला, सतनाम का भर भर प्याला, आप पीबे मोहि प्यावे। साधो सो सतगुरु मोहि भावे। साधो सो सतगुरु मोहि भावे। ओम ओम ओम।
Thank you, Amar Bhai. May I now request Shri Suresh Heller, Senior Advocate and Chairman of Lecture Committee, to deliver welcome address.
Good evening, everybody. It's a matter of pride and pleasure and privilege for me to join Honorable Trustees of the Public Trust, Pralin Public Trust, and the members of the Lecture Committee in extending a very warm welcome to you all. We are gratified and happy that Lord Bhikhu Parekh, member of House of Lords, has found time and agreed to speak to us today. The subject is multiculturalism in the age of globalization. We have before us Honorable the Chief Justice, Mrs. Sunita Agrawal, judges from the Supreme Court, judges from the High Court, and former judges, eminent lawyers, junior colleagues, faculties, and students. I welcome you all. Public Trust has been founded by a great and an eminent judge, proposed by Desai, who lived his life as an example for all of us. He worked hard, lived economically all throughout his life, and left his heritage for the future upliftment of weaker section and for the legal fraternity. The trust has been working incessantly to further and promote the objects for which it is set up. Over and above organizing thought-provoking lectures and seminars, the trust has contributed towards generously in the field of medical education, upliftment of women and the people in tribal areas. Shri Ajay Vai Umat, an eminent journalist, desired of me to have Dr. Bhikhu Bhai for our lecture series. I knew Dr. Parekh when he was the Vice Chancellor of MS University in 1981. So I also joined the desire. Lord Bhikhu Bhai accepted our invitation. I am grateful to him for both of them. I know that today's guest requires no introduction, but I must tell you, Professor Parekh was born in Gujarat, graduated from Mumbai University in 1954. In 1959, he went to London School of Economics for postgraduate research and also obtained doctorate in 1965. He has been the professor at the London School of Economics and University of Hull. He has received fellowship from the British Academy and the European Academy. He has been a visiting professor at several universities, including Harvard, Pennsylvania, and the Institute of Advanced Study in Vienna. He also served our country when he returned to India for 3 years in 1981 as Vice Chancellor of the University of Baroda. He has written dozens of books. He has received Padma Bhushan. The Political Studies Association of the UK listed him among the 12 greatest political philosophers of the 20th century. May I now request honorable guest to share his thoughts on the subject. We are eager to listen to him.
Thank you, sir, for your earnest welcome address. It is an honor and privilege to invite Shri Lord Bhikhu Parekh to deliver today's memorial lecture on multiculturalism in the age of globalization.
Thank you. Shall I start? Thank you. Distinguished past and present judges of high courts, members of legal fraternity, ladies and gentlemen, I am most grateful to the chair and members of Justice Desai Memorial Lecture Committee and to the trustees of the Pralin Public Charitable Trust for inviting me to deliver the 20th Justice Desai Memorial Lecture. I would also like to take the opportunity to discharge a long accumulated debt and thank Suresh Bhai Shelat for his considerable help and support during the time I was Vice Chancellor of the University of Baroda and often needed his legal skills and wisdom to navigate my way through legal cases. The title of my lecture this afternoon, Multiculturalism in the Age of Globalization, raises two related questions. First, what do we mean by multiculturalism and globalization? These frequently and indiscriminately used terms lack clarity and precision, and they need to be carefully defined and analyzed. Second, how are the two related? Particularly, how does globalization impact on multiculturalism and promote, distort, or undermine it? I shall take the two questions in that order. So let's start with globalization. What is it? Human beings ask questions about the meaning and significance of their lives, their activities, their relationships. To ask what is the meaning of an activity is to ask about its point or purpose. Why should I be doing this? And to ask what is its significance is to ask questions about its worth or value, the kind and degree of importance to be assigned to it. The questions about meaning and significance can be asked about every human activity, such as writing a book, cooking a meal, following a career, voting, protesting against an injustice. They can also be asked about every human relationship, such as being a father. What does it mean to be a father? A neighbor, a husband, a colleague, a citizen, and also about human life in general. The beliefs or views that human beings entertain about the meaning and significance of human life form the basis of their culture. To put the point differently, a culture is a historically evolving and commonly shared system of meaning and significance within a particular community, or what comes to the same thing, a system of beliefs and practices in terms of which a group of human beings understand, regulate, and structure their individual and collective lives. Culture represents a way of both understanding and organizing human life. Human beings conduct themselves in the world based on how they understand it. In this fundamental sense, their relation to the world is culturally mediated. One might criticize, revise, or even reject one's culture, but one cannot avoid seeing the world from within the framework of whatever culture one eventually embraces. Every society is based on a shared common culture and uses a variety of means to induct its members into it. That's culture. What is multicultural? And what I want to do is to work my way up to understanding multiculturalism by first examining the concept of culture, then multiculture, and then multiculturalism. What is ism doing there? A multicultural society is one with several cultures. Meaning what? Several different systems of meaning and significance in terms of which human beings try to make sense of their lives. Now, you might say that at one level, every society today is multicultural because it includes individuals who differ from each other on important matters. But in a more specific sense, a multicultural society refers to a society that includes organized groups or communities based on differences on significant areas of human life. In other words, a multicultural society, properly so called, has not only differences but organized differences articulated in the form of communities. And differences not just about what to wear and what to eat, but differences about the fundamental issues of life, which is what culture is concerned with. That differences are not transient or minor and are often sources of deep disagreement and conflict. People differ in their approaches to multicultural society. You might resent those differences and look for ways of reducing or even eliminating them. Others might welcome these differences. The former, that is, those who resent the differences, basically value a single culture or monocultural society, whereas those who value cultural differences value a multicultural society, a society with several cultures. But there again, there is a difference. Basically, multiculturalism is a welcoming response to a multicultural society. The suffix ism is quite interesting, as in terms like liberalism or communism or socialism or whatever. Ism refers to a body of beliefs based on the central idea to which suffix ism is attached. So liberalism is one which has a theory of liberty, socialism has a theory of society, and so on. So multiculturalism is simply a welcoming way to cultural differences. When it sees multicultural society, in principle, its attitude is one of approval. Now, it might indiscriminately welcome all cultural differences or do so selectively. In one case, the former case, we have uncritical multiculturalism. In the latter case, where its approach to differences is selective, it's critical multiculturalism. In either case, a multiculturalist needs to give reasons for valuing cultural differences. They constitute his philosophical justification or theory of multiculturalism. And one very important point to bear in mind, which is often missed by many writers on multiculturalism. Reasons for valuing cultural diversity or multiple culture are not the same as those for valuing culture. Valuing culture is concerned to show why human beings need culture, what important role culture plays in human life, what he or she would lose if denied access to a stable culture. Whereas cultural diversity is concerned to show why he needs access to other cultures, not just his own. Why he needs not just a culture but a diversity of cultures. You can see how easy it is to confuse the two. You start with a discussion on why individual needs access to a culture and end up discussing on why he needs access to a multiplicity of cultures or other cultures. We can show the importance of cultural diversity or several cultures on various grounds. We can argue, for example, that cultural diversity adds to the richness of society, that it provides each culture with an Archimedean standpoint from which to look at itself, that it encourages each to learn from the treasures of other cultures and to engage in a critical dialogue with them. As for the importance of culture, the other side of why culture is important, our reasons will be different, and they will include such things as giving the individual stable orientation, developing his or her capacity for autonomy and critical self reflection, and initiating him into an ongoing historical tradition. You would say each individual is entitled to or should have a right to the resources of a stable culture. That's because culture frames him, gives him a particular orientation, gives him a sense of belonging to an ongoing tradition. These are the reasons why an individual needs access to a culture. Whereas cultural diversity, as I said, are different reasons. Multicultural society I have includes several cultures. Now, these cultures can relate to each other in one of two ways. They may passively coexist within a suitably designed and compartmentalized social order and engage in minimal interaction with each other. That you can have a multiplicity of cultures in a society which mutely coexist, don't talk to each other. Or they might uh, actively seek out each other, interact, and generate new cultures or variations on the existing ones. When you have several cultures, therefore, there are two possible responses. One is to leave them alone, each ghettoized, or to activate their interaction in the hope that something new will be born. In one case, cultural diversity is a passive and mute fact. In the other case, it takes the form of cultural interaction and activating the relation between cultures. I would suggest that although both are multicultural societies, namely societies where cultures simply coexist as opposed to those where cultures interact, both are multicultural societies. The former, where they passively coexist, is far less so because it doesn't actualize the enormous potential of cultural diversity. I am therefore inclined to argue, as I have done in my books, that the interactionist society is a fully developed multicultural society and that the term is best reserved for it. At all levels of a multicultural society, culturally interactionist, there is a lively engagement between cultures and constant opening up of new possibilities and opportunities. In such a society, a creatively interactive multicultural society, creative experiments, often unplanned, take place at various levels. In food, for example, one would find new items, new ingredients, new ways of preparing food, serving it, and so on. Similar things would happen in other areas, such as music, different traditions of music experimenting with each other, borrowing bits from each other, and you can have the modern jazz or some other kind of music borrowing on different traditions. Literature, where you can have not only one literary tradition, the English one, for example, but drawing on the Indian way of writing English and including that in the English literary tradition. Dance, political ideology, and forms of religious self expression. That interactive cultures can interact at various levels, at various degrees of depth, and produce a new culture in their own image. In all these areas, society's prevailing culture undergoes small and large changes in both public and private realms and generates both moments of tension and conflict as well as moments of achievement and pride. Culture of a society is articulated and implicated in its economic, legal, and political and other institutions, and changes in it get reflected in and in turn reflect changes in these institutions. I talked about who is a multiculturalist, what is a multicultural society. Now, I want to turn now to the simple question of a multicultural society has both virtues and weaknesses. A multicultural society is rich, vibrant, open to the world, faces the future with confidence and courage, encourages a pool of talent, and so on. It also, however, faces the problem of holding itself together, maintaining its stability and unity, and keeping its inevitable conflicts within manageable limits. It needs to respect the majority, but also make sure that the majority does not crush minorities or speak and act in the name of the entire society. This is where globalization come in. So I want to turn to the second half of my question, which is how does globalization impact on multiculturalism? Does it sustain it, distort it, facilitate it? What? The question, therefore, is about globalization. Now, globalization is not the same as global interdependence, which has been around since at least the rise of modernity and going on for 500 years. It is a process in which all or most societies are closely related and become an indissoluble part of a well knit globe. Globalization is a situation where no society is immune to the impact of others, and changes in one produce changes in others. Globalization is a matter of degree. The highest point of it is reached when the whole world becomes fully integrated. We are not there yet, but are increasingly moving in that direction. And that's where the relevance of the question. If we are moving in that direction, is it the right direction to move in? And what is the cost? What is the price that we would pay if we get there? Now, globalization is not a single, simple, or homogeneous phenomenon. It occurs in different degrees, at different levels, in different areas, such as the economic, the political, the cultural, and the moral. There is economic globalization. I'll talk about that in a second. There is also political globalization when different countries come together and you begin to form, let's say, United Nations. The first time in history, all states belong to it. Likewise, you can have cultural globalization, where the same cultural processes are available in every part of the world. Or moral globalization, when the entire mankind becomes a matter of our concern and we feel worried about if people are starving elsewhere or dying somewhere because of lack of resources. Globalization is a human phenomenon, not a natural process, and is subject to human control. It occurs as a result of a large number of factors, such as human inventions, technological development, policies of multinational agencies, unplanned actions, human choices, and so on, and has a result acquired because of the combination of factors that have gone into its creation. It has acquired an air of unpredictability and inexorability. We almost seem to feel that we don't quite know where we'll end up tomorrow and where the process of globalization would take us. All forms of globalization, whether it's economic, moral, cultural, or whatever, have both harmful and beneficial consequences. Take economic globalization. It makes the national economy competitive, improves the quality of products, raises the current level of technological sophistication, reduces the prices of goods and services, and makes them more accessible to the large masses of people. But economic globalization also subjects national economies to the vagaries of international market, encourages currency speculation, floods the world with imported goods, and at least in the short run, diverts talent away from the developing countries. Such mixed consequences also issue from cultural globalization, to which we now turn. Cultural globalization refers to globalization brought about either directly in cultural products and services or occurring as a result of globalization in other areas of life. Globalization, cultural globalization, has both positive and negative consequences. It creates a footloose class of techno managerial elite that is more closely connected with his counterpart elsewhere than with his compatriots. A highly sophisticated techno managerial elite constantly in contact with others, trained in the same schools, the same universities, dressed alike, almost a universal class arising, but creamed off from the existing society. The society therefore lacks cohesion because one class of it is looking outside, the other is stuck within. It lacks cohesion and shared purposes. Globalization also destroys local industries by absorbing them in a global market and replacing their products with imported goods. It facilitates terrorist movements by making it easier to funnel funds and it leads to a demand for reducing the number of immigrants and outsiders. It threatens the integrity of national culture weakens its local roots, and subordinates it to a larger global ends. This causes deep unease and leads to a clamor for homogenizing the national culture and suppressing internal dissent and differences. So, on the one hand, you have the phenomenon of globalization, opening up the country to the world outside. On the other hand, the enormous resistance from within the country and wanting to close its doors, keep the migrants out, keep asylum seekers out, and turn it simply into a ghettoized part of the world. Local forces have little chance of standing up to globalization, let alone defeating it, and they get wiped out in the contest between local forces and global forces. Globalization also increases inequality. While lifting the poorest and the weakest, it increases the distance between them and the rest and breaks up society into mutually uninterested, even mutually antagonistic groups. It acquires the character of a self propelling and inexorable natural process and weakens the human sense of freedom and agency because people do not feel that they are free to control their own destiny. Their destiny seems to them to be controlled by forces beyond their control. In this kind of world created by globalization, I turn to my last question: is there a space for cultural diversity and multiculturalism? If so, what is it? Where is it? I suggest that there is space for multiculturalism, as I described it earlier, but that space is narrow and insecure. Globalization provides easy access to other cultures and facilitates their interaction, but at the same time, it also distorts that interaction. How? In the following way: enjoying access to cultures from different parts of the world, people are tempted to experiment with them, but lacking familiarity with their history and background and a deeper understanding of them, their approach remains insecure and superficial. So when you interact with foreign cultures without knowing anything about where they come from, what they are, what their consequences are. So globalization facilitates interaction, but at the same time removes any kind of knowledge you might have about other cultures. What for kind of interaction is it? Foreign cultures that come to country, are selected by the dominant economic and cultural forces, of which they have a poor grasp, with the result that they cannot make them equal and self-critical partners in intercultural interactions. Or look at the elite in the globalized economy or globalized polity. The elite comes from a narrow social base and is largely oriented to the outside world, with the result that its grasp of its own culture is inevitably weak, and it cannot make its own culture a partner in intercultural interaction because it knows so little about it. You create a class which is more tuned into the world outside, but not knowing little about his own culture, his own background, because that's the schools and universities where it has never been. Multiculturalism presupposes good knowledge of one's own culture as well as that of others. The courage to confront each culture with appropriate questions, a period of calm and critical reflection, the ability to face the new without being overwhelmed, and so on. In short, multicultural disposition, the phrase I am rather fond of, or the ability to participate in and enjoy cultural interaction, does not come easily to people. It requires propitious conditions which cultivate it, and globalization provides only some of them. Globalization so far has been dominated by the West, which sets its tone and defines its objectives. The non West, of course, has not been entirely passive. It also uses the resources of globalization to project and promote its cultural products. New Age movement, the spread of non Western religious and spiritual movements, medicine, even Ayurveda, arts, literature, Indian yoga and meditation are all good examples of how the non West can also take part in globalization. But in spite of all this, and while this is all true, the fact remains that Western culture enjoys enormous power and prestige, and its interactions with other cultures occur under grossly unequal conditions. So that leads me to my last point. The consequences of globalization that I have discussed follow from globalization in one of three ways, which is quite important. First, some of these consequences are inherent in globalization and cannot be tackled without stopping it, which is an extremely difficult and virtually impossible idea. Or they are not inherent in globalization, but they are inherent in the current form of globalization, the neoliberal form. And the argument is that if we adopted a different form of globalization, not a neoliberal, but let's say socialist or liberal democratic, these consequences might not follow. Or thirdly, they don't follow from globalization, either directly or indirectly, but rather from the context in which globalization is being practiced. And this context includes inequalities which exist as a result of colonialism, injustices, disparities in power and influence, and because globalization has to operate, function within the context set by these inequalities of power and so on, it produces the kind of unacceptable consequences I talked about earlier. We cannot step out of globalization without paying an enormously heavy price, but we can do much to regulate it and subordinate it to worthwhile goals, including fostering the spirit of multiculturalism, the spirit of openness to other cultures and willingness to interact with them. So that requires reforming current international institutions, UN, IMF, World Bank, as well as creating new ones that are better able to understand and support the ongoing human quest for a rich, open, and genuinely plural civilization. Multiculturalism is concerned with a kind of civilization in which different cultures make their own input, which makes it richer. To create that kind of culture, we would need to set up institutions, create new institutions that are grounded in that kind of philosophy and eventually help produce a humane and a just culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us with your thoughts. Now, may I request Shri Kamal Trivedi, Advocate General and member of the lecture committee, to propose the vote of thanks.
Our today's esteemed speaker, Lord Bhikhu Parekh, Honorable the Chief Justice of High Court of Gujarat, respected Justice Sunita Ji Agarwal, present as well as former Honorable Judges of the High Court of Gujarat, Honorable Mr. Justice C.K. Thakkar and Honorable Mr. Justice M.R. Shah, former Judges, Supreme Court of India, Honorable Mr. Justice Mohit Bhai Shah, former Chief Justice, Bombay High Court, Honorable Mr. Justice K.S. Javeri, former Chief Justice, Orissa High Court, an inspirational soul behind Prodh Bhai Parivar, respected trustees of Praveen Public Charitable Trust, members of Prodh Bhai Parivar, and my colleagues in Justice P.D. Desai Memorial Lecture Committee, the distinguished gathering of lawyers, senior advocates, student friends, invited guests, and in particular, Shri Ajay Bhai Umat. Very good evening to all. It is indeed heartening to see this 20th Justice P.D. Desai Memorial Lecture being held virtually, whereby we have got together under the auspices of Praveen Public Charitable Trust, founded by late Justice P.D. Desai, whose memory always serves as a beacon light for all of us. It's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks today. Let me at the outset, on behalf of Praveen Public Charitable Trust and Justice P.D. Desai Memorial Lecture Committee, take this opportunity to sincerely thank our today's guest, Lord Bhikhu Parekh, for sparing valuable time out of his busy schedule. Sir, your thought-inspiring address on today's topic of this memorial lecture was indeed stimulating and has enlightened our minds. As we all know, Lord Parekh has built an illustrious career establishing himself as an accomplished scholar, an academic, as well as a leading political theorist. It is our absolute privilege to hear his views on today's subject, multiculturalism in the age of globalization, from the person who himself pioneered the concept of multiculturalism. Coming back to various references given by Lord Parekh in his illuminating address, I must say that it was intriguing to note, as a result of fast-paced globalization, the expression multiculturalism has gained significance. I would like to quote particular references when Lord Parekh said, "A multicultural society is one that comprises of groups that have organized differences which are fundamental beliefs and views. A multicultural society can either welcome all cultural differences or be critical of it." According to him, multicultural society has virtues as it is rich, vibrant, and open to the world, but also has problems holding itself together, maintaining stability and unity, and balancing respect and interest of majority and minority. I personally feel that in a multicultural society, adopting measures that encourage representation and dialogue between culturally diverse majority as well as minority groups would allow such a society to thrive. In view of this, the members of such a society would share a mutual commitment to the growth of community. According to him, it is always desirable to regulate and subordinate globalization within the kind of globalization we are thinking of. I personally feel that what Gandhiji quoted, I must quote, "Our ability to reach unity and diversity will be the perfect present for rest of our civilization." Our esteemed speaker has provided enough thoughts on today's topic to be brooded over. Once again, our sincere gratitude to Lord Parekh for having readily accepted our invitation to inspire all of us by his very thought-provoking lecture. As I conclude, I would like to make a special mention about Justice Kalpesh Bhai Javeri, as well as Shri Suresh Bhai Shrilat, for being strong pillars in organizing this memorial lecture. I would like to thank the volunteers who have worked behind the scene for making today's virtual program a great success. Special thanks to our trustee Shri Amarbai Bhatt for beautiful rendition of a prayer, and to Ms. Rajvi Patel for comparing today's program. My sincere thanks to our august audience for joining and being a part of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session.